This is the webinar we are all here for. Speaker one would be Ashish Jogi, who is the co-founder and CEO at FootTech Solutions. And speaker two would be from the same session, Abuli Jogi, who is the founder and CTO at FootTech Solutions. In session two, the topic is fortification and product market fit. How can smart protein be at the bottom of pyramid? Founder and managing director Rinka Banerjee of Thinking Force Consulting Private Limited would be the speaker in this session.
Hello everyone. I hope you're able to see the screen.
Yes.
Shardul? Yeah.
Yes.
So hello everyone. This is Ashish here from FootTech Solutions, and on the same system with me also Aboli here. I'll be doing most of the talking, and Aboli will pitch in as and when required. So to start with, first of all, thanks to Good Food Institute for suggesting such a wonderful and relevant topic. How do a smart entrepreneur's journey from idea to market looks like, or from lab to scale? So the intent of today's call is not to kind of like be a one-way communication and tell you how it looks like, because most of you are living it, you know how it is. So I believe that rather this session would be more fruitful if we have more time for question answers, because I'm sure many of the audience, they will have like a number of questions, how to do this, how to solve this challenge, and will benefit and more, and the session would be more productive. We go in an interactive mode. So what I'll do is I'll quickly run through the slides and then pass on to Rinka for her session, and then we can go for question and answers. So my slide deck is basically divided into two parts. I'll take just 2 or 3 minutes to introduce what FootTech is and how FootTech is helping the plant-based startups in India to develop the products to address their R&D challenges. And then I'll jump on how a journey typically looks like from a lab to scaling up, and what are the problems, what are the do's and don'ts, and certain areas where we have kind of hands of experience, the challenges that we faced, how we overcome them, and then certain key takeaways for this particular space from Indian perspective. Okay, so FootTech, if you ask me, basically we are just food living people who are passionate about converting ideas into great products. That's the way I simply put it. And what we do is, like, with our new product development expertise, the R&D expertise, with the state-of-the-art infrastructure, and the knowledge base that we have gathered over past several years, we are helping the plant-based startups to convert their ideas into market-ready products. So, and if I have to cut this entire definition even shorter, we are kind of a technical and R&D consultants for the plant-based startups in India. So this is our approach, and most of you are familiar with the design thinking model. This is what we follow when we develop solutions for our clients. And so I'll quickly run through this because I want to spend more time on the R&D capabilities. So as far as it comes to our R&D capabilities, we are a team of qualified food scientists and technologists. Then we have a state-of-the-art food innovation center at Mumbai, which is also going expansion. So at present, what we have is a R&D center in Thane and a pilot plant at a separate location. So both of this plus some expansion in terms of capabilities, certain processing capabilities, packaging capabilities, certain categories that we were not able to cater to earlier. So all this would be consolidated in a big space in a place called Bhiwandi near Mumbai. So this would be a state-of-the-art food innovation center. We actually had a plan to get it running this Akshay Tritiya, but then unfortunately because of the lockdown, we had to shift our plans. So, but we hope to start be up and running very soon. So, the main capabilities that we have is like, if I have to summarize it, we can develop products in all major categories in food, beverages, and plant-based segment. We have very complex applications or the processings like extruders or thermomixing, emulsifying, high shear mixing, all these kind of capabilities we have. In addition to the regular, what you see on screen is just part of it. Is not even 50% of what we have. And I didn't want to put a long list here. The as far as the R&D capabilities are concerned, I can say that we are one of the most well-equipped new product development labs in India, and which can cater to almost all kind of product development activities. Then this snapshot about work, we have more than 100 satisfied clients, more than 500 products developed so far. As I already said, India's most well-equipped new product development lab. We are successfully developed product into 12 major categories and several first in Indian market kind of products to our credit. Then this is one important slide where I would like to touch base, like how we are helping the plant-based startups in India. So it starts right from the selection of right product and right product portfolio. So those of who have already started working on their products would appreciate this much. Like in plant-based industry, when you start developing a product, very soon you realize that no matter how simple a product looks on the face of it, it is going to be technically heavy. As you go along, you realize that no, you have to adapt a deep science approach, or you have to adapt a scientific method to develop the product, and then soon you realize the operational constraint. Soon you realize the need for technical expertise and techno-commercial expertise. So so the role that not us but any technical and R&D consultant that plays, and how they are helping the plant-based startups in India is they help the startups to reach to the prototypes very quickly, because they have the required infrastructure, which is the most important part here, and the technical expertise, which is also equally important. With both these resources and the knowledge base, the experience, they can help you get your ideas into prototype very soon. As they say, like, you should fail fast. So the faster you develop the prototypes, the sooner your vision becomes clear, like how you have to, whether we have to adjust to whatever you thought before, where your plans need amendments and things like that. So for example, in certain cases, reaching to a prototype level earlier helps a lot in funding. We have a couple of examples like that. One in the vegan space itself, like the plant-based space itself. Like if you have prototype in hand, the funding becomes it becomes a very much easy relatively. Then with the expertise, because they have been there, we have faced the challenges, we have solved those challenges, we can help you reduce the time to reach to the market. And that means that you have saved huge on the opportunity losses that otherwise you could have made if you try things on your own. So it's very much critical to have a right development partner on your journey to market, because uh, as you go along, for those who already are there, as I already said, they know, and those who want to start the journey, I would emphasize that no matter, even if it's like simply a kind of plant-based milk, or maybe even simpler product like a plant-based protein supplement, this is going to be a technical. You need to have a technical and scientific approach to it. You have to deep dive into the science. And that's where the technical and R&D experts come in to your help. You can always use the strong network of the technical and R&D consultancies to your benefit, plus their vast knowledge base that they have acquired over years working on several projects. So even companies like us, we have a number of co-packers in panel with us who are trusted partners, and you can start manufacturing without investing into plant and machinery. That particular amount you can that particular funds or capital you can use for other better purposes like marketing, reaching out to the market, and things like that. So in certain cases, many startups, they're also collaborating with ingredient houses. So if the consultants like us, they join hands in this collaboration, things could move pretty much faster. So in a way, it's like that this is a technically heavy journey for any startup. And if you get indulged too much into the R&D challenges, it is like you may lose the focus from other important things like growing your business or seeking investment and much more important things. So the way it is, if you have a right development partner on your side, it is like they take care of your R&D challenges and you focus on more important things. So this is more or less the way we are helping the plant-based startups in India and the plant-based ecosystem in India. So I'll shift to the journey, how it looks from idea to market. We divide it typically into 4 parts like product definition, prototype development, process development, and scaling up. So product definition is nothing but, as you all know, is kind of like all the different attributes you want to have in a product. So like, for example, if you have what kind of ingredients you want to have in the product, what kind of sensory attributes it should have, how it should taste, what should be the texture, mouthfeel, and those kind of things, what claims you want to make, where do you position your product, and what is your price point, all these things together. So when formulating a product definition, it is very much important that you have your homework right, and you can start with your dream project, but you have to be flexible given the techno-commercial feasibility. And at the same time, you have to deliver a testy product at a desired price point. So accordingly, you have to phrase your product definition. Once your product definition is frozen, you can go towards prototype development, where the key is like ingredient sourcing and then doing experiments and trials, uh, testing multiple hypotheses parallelly to save the time, then what product attributes are challenging, what are not that challenging, and then identifying the critical process parameters for the next step of process development. And you have to evaluate these things quickly and move on to the other alternatives. If you're iterate quickly, evaluate the products and go to the next step quickly. So, and here again the key is achieving the balance between taste and price. So when you're evaluating your product, one key takeaway that many startups, specifically some of them in the plant-based space that we have worked with, is like avoid too much of evaluation with your close friends and families. So it is critical for you to get the product evaluated by your target consumer. It may or may not be your friend. It may or may not be your family. And do not compromise on the prototype to save the time. And that is another key message I would like to give to this group. Then moving to process development. Once the prototype, you're happy with the prototype, you think that market would accept this, then is the time to go for a pilot run, which would more or less identify the process critical parameters. It will help you in standardization of raw material, the process flow, and identifying the manufacturing checklist, and you can move to the next level of scaling up. And as and while scaling up, you again have to be adapt a scientific method to standardize the raw material sourcing, packaging material sourcing, the process SOPs, and right training to the staff who manufactures. And another thing is like when you are manufacturing with the other vendors, it is very critical that you have the key controls in your hand. So you have to devise a strategy such that you maintain your trade secret. At the same time, you manufacture at a third party, but you maintain your secrets, your trade secrets, or the recipe, the secret of your recipe. So how to do that? The technical experts can help you with that. And from the process development onwards, I guess you should really get involved and get your hands dirty, because unless and until you take charge of it, you might be taken for a ride if you are not from, if you do not have a previous experience in the space. Then following a few slides are certain hands-on project which we have covered at a very high level, just to share with you the technical challenges that we have faced and probably some of the startups may face if they are working in the similar products, and what approach we have adopted. So like the project where we develop burger patty chunks as a topping for pizza and similar meat products. Some important some important challenges are the choice of proteins, how to achieve the juiciness of the real meat, how to attain the texture that the meat has, the body of meat, shelf life, and obviously the most important thing that the Indian market looks is the taste versus price, like how it is, how does the product taste, and are you able to achieve the price parity. So, and in achieving all this, there's a lot of technical expertise required, and you need a lot of experimentation. And for that, you need a good expert on your side, along with the required infrastructure. For one of the product, I remember, I will not take the name here, but or I guess I have it in the coming up slides, like the plant-based egg liquid, which we developed. So we were conducting at least 3 to 4 trials daily. So we were kind of in improvising with each trial, and that's how we could develop it in 3 months. So 3 to 4 months. So the key here is you need expertise, you need infrastructure to save the time to reach the prototype or the market earlier. So in absence of both of these factors, where you may end up wasting a lot of time to reach to the market. And that is the critical thing where the technology and R&D companies like us, they add to the ecosystem. So another product is plant-based dairy. Here again, like milk or dairy products, here again there are similar kind of problems: how to achieve the mouthfeel, how to get the appearance, which is close to the. For example, if we're doing the milk, it's close to the real milk. It should not have the grainy or gritty texture. How to match the micronutrients and the fortification and all shelf life. So for example, to achieve the shelf life, you may have to use one technology may not be enough. So you may have to go address the different hurdles, which is called as hurdle technology. And and then certain plant-based proteins. There also you have the challenge of taste. Protein absorption is one major challenge there. And mouthfeel. When coming to the plant-based egg liquid, again, there are very typical problems associated with the proteins. If you want it to kind of like behave as a normal egg liquid, it should exhibit the required gelation, the emulsification. Then the emulsified it should have the body that's tend to stand. Heat penetration should be there. Up and above all this, you should have taste and the shelf life. So these are the few products which where we had faced certain challenges, and the way we've overcome them. Then in the and I guess this is all from my side. I'll just wind up with key takeaways based on our experience with the Indian plant-based startups. What we feel, and the Indian market in general, like we, apart from the plant-based space, we are working with a number of other companies. So in the Indian market, two things are pretty much important, and I guess everyone will appreciate this. That is taste and price. So you have to focus on taste and price, no matter what. And to achieve that, you need technology. Technology is the key here, and that is where the technology and R&D consultancies can help you to do the right things at right time and save your time to reach the market. So that's why it's important to have a right development partner in your journey from idea to market. And that's how the R&D consultancies are contributing to the plant-based ecosystem in India. So I would like to thank everyone for joining, and especially Good Food Institute for their work in this space. And this picture is a bit offbeat, but given the present scenario, I hope and pray that we'll soon see light at the end of the tunnel. And thank you so much. If you have any questions, of course, there is a question and answer session, but if we could not cover your questions, feel free to contact me or Aboli anytime. And I guess that's all from my end, Shardul.
Thank you so much, Ashish. That was a wonderful presentation. I think you covered a lot of ground when it comes to the journey of an entrepreneur when it contacts a food consultancy, research and development, technical consultancy like yours. And I think we covered a lot of ground on how an entrepreneur should really think about the whole new product development process. And there were some good insights. I'm sure a lot of questions would be there in the minds of attendees, and we can take them in the question and answer session, which starts at 5 p.m.
Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you so much, Good Food Institute, for really taking this initiative. I think it's also wonderful that you're trying to connect the entire ecosystem to really be able to find some go-to-market solutions. So I think that's wonderful, and thank you very much. And like Ashish said, at the end of the session, please feel free to ask your questions, and we'll try to answer as many as we can. So just a little bit about myself. I'm Rinka, and I started this company in 2014, so about 6 years ago. Prior to that, I've been pretty much in the industry for a very long time. I was for about 16 years at Unilever, where I was heading the research and development function for foods in South Asia. And prior to that, I was in the US. I worked there for a couple of years, and I did my master's in food science and my bachelor's in dairy technology. So I've been largely, out and out food person from the very beginning. I started this journey in 2014, and with the vision of really seeing how do we, enable and work with a larger set of companies in India who are with their startups or larger companies, and how do we really help them bring their idea to life. That was really with the purpose with which we started Thinking Forks. So what do? We are an end-to-end R&D solutions provider to the industry. And I say food and nutrition in specific, and I'll come back to nutrition a little later. But we look at essentially end-to-end R&D concepts right from the prototyping or the product ideation stage and product strategy stage, all the way through developing the products, testing them out, doing the nutrition profiling, our shelf life studies and manufacturing them, looking at regulatory and so on. So really, how do we bring it out into a commercial product in the market? We are backed by a very strong team of domain experts, and these are all people with 25 plus years of experience in the industry. A lot of them from large companies like Unilever, Britannia, Dabur, and so on. We have a very, very passionate young team of food technologists and packaging technologists who work with us. So it's an exciting team. It's an exciting time that we have. What is also very interesting in the last 6 years is that we've been able to see that we can work with a very, very strong ecosystem of ecosystem partners that work in our network. Now, these partners could be suppliers, they could be manufacturers, they are institutes, with whom we work very closely, and I'll give you some examples as we go along, which makes it extremely, from a time perspective, the quality of work, etc., we're able to bring out some very, very good solutions to the market quickly. So like I said, our services and core of what we do is end-to-end R&D. So we start with essentially setting up the product strategy as to what are you really trying to do. And especially with our startup clients, it's a lot about defining what you really want to do. Because a lot of times people come to me with an idea saying, this is what I want to do, but then it's fairly sketchy. And you have to be very, very sharp about what is the design brief, what are you really trying to do. And then once you do that, then the prototyping process, etc., becomes much faster. So we do that at the very beginning. We then get into prototyping of our products, the packaging. We establish the feasibility of this in a pilot scale process. We don't have a manufacturing or a pilot scale plant of our own, but what we do is we use our ecosystem of partners, which is either institutes, whether it's a CFTRI or an ICT or NIFTM and so on. And we also do work a lot with our vendors and manufacturers. We do work with a lot of our consumer validation agencies to ensure that the consumer testing is done. nutrition profiling. Claims generation is again it's very core to us. The regulatory advisory is very core to us, and that's something that we do at fairly early stages in the process. Once all that is done, we then help commercialize the product, which means identifying of contract manufacturing sites, whether it's your own, which is your captive production site, or co-packers, really helping you through that entire process to identify what equipments are required, where you're going to be manufacturing, does it meet certain quality criteria, all of that. Doing the first couple of production runs with you, and then we do a complete technology transfer. So that is really our core end-to-end R&D work that we do. Apart from that, of course, there are a lot of value-added services that we do, for example, in terms of setting up your quality standards, or its quality improvement of your current products, really looking at competition and saying, where do you stand, stuff like that. So some of our clients in the last 6 years have been some of the larger companies like Unilever, Amazon, Mars, Dr. Reddy's, and so on, and Haldiram, and so on. But also there have been a very large portfolio of startups that we've worked with. I think we're super proud of the fact that we've been able to bring about almost 20 new brands in the market, about 50 plus products in the market over the last 6 odd years, that we've been here. Like I said, I think one of the things that we are quite proud about is about really bringing out market disruptions into the market. We've been able to do that, whether it was the protein bar for yoga bar, or for coconut water and herbal-based beverages for Auric, whether it's home-style curry paste, it's non-fried potato chips, women's health drinks, and so on. There's been a whole bunch of products in the startup ecosystem, the startup space, that we've been able to bring about for them. I think this is something we've been quite proud of. And this is where we also see where the trends of the market is really moving towards. And if you will see, a lot of them today are in the space of clean label, whether it's health and wellness. These are the spaces that people are really looking at. How do I get good products, good food out there, which is also in a lot of these cases that you will see are also fairly affordable. So affordable market solutions, but they bring in the whole thing around nutrition and health, and that's important. We've also helped large companies who are trying to enter a new category. So when the Sanjeev Group came to us with the proposal to get into FMCG, and this was not their space at all, we helped them with their first 3 products that they brought out into the market, complete end-to-end R&D support. And this is what we're doing with some of the larger companies who are trying to enter new categories, and really saying, how do we accelerate our innovations, and how do we bring that sooner into the market? And that's what we've been able to do for the larger organizations. Nutrition and health is a very, very, again, very core and integral to what we do. These are some of the products that we have worked with, but I'll also talk about a little bit about the research part of where we engage with institutes. So if I look at, it could be as simple as something like a high fiber rice, and this is a patented technology of rice, which is within Dr. Mohan's and another institute, where they've been able to bring out a high fiber rice, which is suitable for diabetics, and it's low GI. Similarly, in the space of millets, we've done a lot of work in this space in terms of millets, whether it's about a base millet to a millet-based flakes to millet-based drinks. And we see a lot of potential, especially in this space as well. We do a lot of work where it's not core product development, it's a lot of packaging design, communication design. How do you really put into what kind of claims can you make on the pack, whether it's on pack, whether it's off pack in your digital media, etc. So that's another thing that we work on. One of the things that, again, personally as well as professionally has been very good for us is to be able to work with institutes like the St. John's Research Institute, where we've been working on government grant challenges in really saying, how do we develop affordable solutions for fighting more serious issues like malnourishment. And I'll again take you through a bit of this in a little bit, but this is another space that we've looked at. Mama Bix is a product which is actually, products, biscuits for pregnant and lactating women, but it's got iron, for example, which is, meets 100% of your requirement, which is for people to be had at that time of their life. Like I said, for us, the ecosystem partnerships is very important. And what we do with academia is very important. And this is where we believe that we can really make a difference and bring a difference in terms of really having public-private partnerships. And how do we do that? So one of the things, like I said, is the Government of Karnataka Grand Challenge. We work with on severe acute malnutrition with St. John's. We've also been working on another project right now with them. We've collaborated with people like CFTRI and NDRI, where it's a lot of utilization of their assets and their understanding in certain technologies, whether it's about using their pilot plants, working with their different departments to be able to get their knowledge, whether it's grain science and various different areas. So I think this is a very powerful thing that we have in this country, and we should really know how, we should really be able to leverage this well. So this is another thing that we are, quite a lot into, and I'd be happy if anybody really needs any help in that space. So let me really get down to a little bit about what do we see as opportunities, and have had some good discussions with Shardul and Varun, and it's an interesting space. But I think in the context of India, and I would really like to try and bring this down to the context of just the Indian subcontinent and see what problems can it solve for us here. So yes, plant proteins, could do well for human health, and I would like to specify in terms of human health. While yes, there are countries which are trying to move towards this because they've been eating too much of animal protein. In our case, we are largely a fairly plant protein based, country in terms of the diet that we have. But how can the plant proteins make a huge difference in terms of the human health in our context, where we don't or we can't afford to have too much of animal protein? I think let's just look at it from a affordable nutrition, affordable human health perspective, and how can plant proteins really work there. Of course, plant proteins in terms of planetary health is something that we all talk about, and I think that's important. If I look at millets, for example, and the amount of work that's happening in that space, I think it's quite interesting, the fact that it's a very, very sustainable crop, and how do we, how can we make more out of it? So for me, that's again another important area. Clean label and free from diets, this is something that we've been seeing over the last 6 years in terms of just by the briefs that we get, especially from our startup clients. We see so much in this space in terms of saying, I would like it to be clean, I would like it to be, I would really don't want to add preservatives and things like that. And I think that's where it is moving towards, and I think that's important, even from a consumer ask perspective. What are the challenges we see? And I think I've had many debates and discussions as well with the Good Food Institute, and it'd be really good for us to open this out and have more conversations on this. What do we really see as challenges for plant alternatives in our subcontinent here? I would say it's about really seeing how can we get new affordable sources of protein. Yeah. So today we use a lot of, let's say it's pea protein and some of the other proteins that we look at, a lot of them are imported. The cost at which you get it in the country, the cost at which you have to therefore then match your protein and all of that then becomes so high that it's still a very top of the pyramid kind of a solution. It is still a very, modern trade, top of the pyramid kind of, access, from an access point of view, kind of solutions, right? And we will talk a little bit about this in the next couple of slides, is about really about improved nutrition profile and digestibility. And just because we are consuming a lot of plant proteins, basically being a largely cereal and lentil and all of that based diet, while we do have enough non-vegetarian, but how do we get better quality protein into our diets? And I think that's another question to really look at, how can we get there? And the other one, which is always a challenge, which Ashish also spoke about, which is about saying improving sensory qualities and stability. And again, there is an enormous amount of work which is happening within the ecosystem with a lot of our suppliers, and we'll talk about that. And we really need to see how can we give something which is great tasting, very nutritious, affordable, all of that. So all of that putting in place is not a simple one, but I think if we can work together on this, we can find solutions. So the cost challenge, and I'm saying this, I was just looking at Mintel and I said, this is not even just an India problem, right? It's something that is there, US, Canada, China. If you look at the numbers, close to 50%, so 47% in US, 66% in Canada, and so on, they find that plant-based protein products are too expensive. And I think this is something that we should really be debating a lot more about, saying, how are we going to find low-cost solutions for, this part of the world? Yeah. If you look at what some of the innovators, and I was again looking at some of the patents that have happened around the world, and a lot of them are in the space of finding alternative protein sources. So people are looking at broccoli and aquatic plants and stuff like that. What struck me was actually the patent that's pending from India, which was about saying, how can I use agricultural waste and get protein from there. And I think that was interesting, because India, if you look at the food and agriculture sector, the amount of waste that we produce, whether it's fruit and vegetable, grains, etc., is enormous. And if there was a way that we could get the best out of that from protein, amino acids and stuff like that, that would be extremely, extremely useful. So I think one of the things I was looking at is this whole protein from de-oiled rice bran, and really using it from the waste material. So I would again pose this as a question, I would say, and it probably, we need to define our problem statements in this category. And this would be one of the problem statements as well, is to see how can we get low cost solutions locally developed in India or in the subcontinent for the solutions in the subcontinent, rather than depending a lot on just everything which is coming from import. It's not an easy one. It's something we're early days where we are, but I think this is a space would be really worth looking at. And I'd really urge organizations such as yours, Good Food Institute, etc., where we can really have more discussions around this and see how do we engage to be able to get more challenges happening in this space, whether it's the grand challenge, whether it's working with DBT, etc., and saying how can we get more work happening in this space. Yeah. The other one is the nutrition challenge, and that's like something which is perennial, which has been there for a long time, and it's not really going very far. It's just getting worse. So if you look at the lower income and bottom of the pyramid, and this is where I come down to bottom of the pyramid, we still have issues here in terms of stunting, wasting. Under 5 overweight is also there, which there doesn't seem to be much data. But this is a space where we're looking at where our work with St. John's, for example, is a lot in the space of malnutrition. And it's really looking at under 5 stunting and wasting, low birth weight as some of the problems to solve. On the other hand, we have issues like obesity, diabetes, anemia, all of that. And that anemia is across the group, across the board, of course. But when you look at obesity, diabetes, it's there, and it's there in rural populations as well. It's not just an urban thing, but much larger in the urban sector as well. So this is a big challenge for us to solve. And is plant protein-based solution, are there solutions that one can look at very specifically on nutrition? So, and I'm just quoting a paper which I was reading, and again, Dr. Sumati and Dr. Anura are people that I have worked with very closely, and I've been very fortunate to work with them. I think this is a space where they've published this article where it really talks about the fact that 60% of protein from cereals, India lives on, 60% of their protein is from cereals, and relatively low digestibility and quality. So what can we do about improving the protein digestibility, amino acid scores, which is like PDCAS, etc.? How do we get better protein solutions and better quality protein to our, consumers? In this paper, of course, it's about rural Indian population, and which is where the bottom of the pyramid as well comes. What do we do about that, right? Looking at the protein energy ratio and really saying how can we get better quality protein? The challenge is that, especially in bottom of the pyramid or middle of the pyramid as well, I would say, is that the risk of the deficiency in this population is high because we're talking of relatively low BMI populations. And these are people with diets which are low in fruits and vegetables. Unfortunately, even our children, even in urban India today, our children are eating much less fruits and vegetables than they should. So I think this is something that we should really be looking at and really saying, how can we enhance the quality of protein intake in rural India, as per this paper, but I would say in general, and really get a quality of our diet up. And I think that is a challenge that we need to meet. And I'd really be happy to discuss with all of you to see how can we take plant protein and see how can we do better with that. So what are some of the companies outside? And this is again a Mintel report. So, but basically a lot of the companies from outside doing, sort of enriching it with amino acids. Some of the products were enriched with fortification, with some vitamins and minerals and so on. To be able to say how can I get a better quality food out there. So this, from a sensory perspective, of course, we know, and I think all of you working in this space would know it better than me probably, but a whole bunch of issues like weenie notes, masking, bitterness is an issue, stuff like that. And this is a space where we've seen over the last several years now with my engagement with flavor houses and some of the good ones like Jubidan and Firmenich and IFF and so on. They've done some fantastic work in the space of flavor masking. whether it is in terms of bean meat flavor masking, whether it's in terms of flavor boosting, whether we're looking at salt reduction, we're looking at sugar reduction, we're looking at various things. So how do you still make a sensory impact which is not as bad? So we're looking at some very good piece of work that they've done, and I think it'll be good for you guys to engage a lot with the flavor houses, etc., to see what they've done there. Solubility, of course, is a challenge. Let's say if I want to make a instant drink, for me pea protein is still a challenge. How do I get a good highly soluble pea protein, etc.? Extrusion, yes, there are a lot of extrusion facilities for basic dry extrusion. If I want to do a wet extrusion process, things like that, is it available? We need to really look at that, right? Texture, there is some bits of work and fair amount of work that's happening in this space, like again, using fibers as another interesting thing for texture, and the various other additives and companies like Ingredion and DuPont, etc., again doing a lot of work in this space in terms of texture. Yeah. We are a country which has eggless mayonnaise, and of course we put whey protein in there to get the fluffiness, etc. But we use a lot of our fibers and starches and stuff like that to still get the same texture that egg mayonnaise gives us. So some of the products that we work with, like I said, very early on days, Yoga Bar, we've done some of their protein work, and we done that was a good piece of work. And lentils came in at that time. Manna is another brand out in the south where we did a lot of their work using millets. And another interesting product, which was for 2Yum actually, and I was saying, this is again something doesn't have any milk solids or egg or meat or whatever, but it's high in protein. It's made with our own regular grains and dals and all of that. It's high in fiber. And and you're still able to deliver a good product at an affordable price. Yeah, and using traditional technology. So this was using a basic traditional khakra technology. And I convert khakra technology to a very, very interesting snack. And that is how this came about. So this was an interesting product that we did. The one that we're quite proud to be associated with is with St. John's, where we're doing a lot of work on the whole sort of ready-to-use therapeutic food, which is for children below the age of 5. And this is where we're looking at where they have less milk intake, they have extremely big issues in terms of growth rates, in terms of their low birth weights and so on, and saying how can you develop products which is intended for the bottom of the pyramid, which is high and it's fortified with everything that they need. It's delivering the protein, not just the protein, but also the fat requirements, etc. Yeah, and so we're really trying to see, and we're doing some work here. It's all work in progress at the moment, but we have made some good progress in terms of developing products in this space. There are regulatory challenges. So for example, if you look at products which is less than 2, the FSSAI or the food regulations in the country will tell you that they need to meet 70% PR of casein. Now they haven't even moved to PDCAS, by the way. So, but those are things that we need to really look at and saying, how can we get it to that same level without the addition of milk protein? Now, for me, the issue there is not the adding of milk protein because I don't want to add milk. For me, the issue there of adding milk protein is because it's expensive. And I think that is something that we need to really be able to find out. Do we have solutions there? So it's a little different from maybe, thinking about, can I have a Beyond Meat kind of a product in India? Yes, can I have a Beyond Meat kind of a product in India? But can it also solve a problem of saying to somebody who doesn't get enough meat to eat, can I give a lower cost option today for that person to eat meat? So I think those are questions that we need to answer. Those are the kind of, things we need to discuss, and therefore put down probably some projects, I would say, which could then work in a larger public-private partnership area, and how we could work together to find solutions. So yeah, so I would say in summary, if I look at the overall pyramid of our country, whether it's bottom, middle, or top, taste is critical. It needs to be natural. Now, if you make a protein thing, which is with a whole bunch of chemicals, etc., whether it's top end or bottom end, they would find it difficult to believe, and why should I have you? Nutrition is paramount, and I would say that's very important for us. And for me, the cost is critical. I think it's important to deliver at a cost that we can afford as part of the subcontinent. Yeah, planetary health, of course, is important, and I think this is something that we all have need a commitment to do. But I think, like for me and for all of us, I think human health is extremely important for this part of the world. Yeah, and especially today in these days when you sit at home and wonder about everything that's happening around you, people not even being able to get one meal in a day. Can we do something there using plant? Keeping an eye on clean meat and clean label, of course, is important. Really keeping an eye on new technologies to be able to say, how can we solve the problem? And this is where I believe there is a huge opportunity in the country. We produce so much of cereal grains. We consume so much of cereal grains and, plant protein in general. We should be in a good position to be able to create technology which is more relevant for this subcontinent. So yeah, this is what I'd like to really end with. Let's collaborate together. Let's find solutions that really don't cost the earth, whether don't cost the earth from a planetary health perspective, but don't cost the earth from just a cost perspective. So that's really about it from me. And feel free to get in touch with us if you have any questions or anything that you need help with. Of course, my details are with the GFI as well. So yeah, so that's about it from me, Shardul.
Thank you so much, Rinka. That was a very nice presentation, and I think it covered a lot of ground on what kind of thinking entrepreneurs should have for products that they're developing for the masses and not just for niche categories. I'd also like to invite Varun Deshpande, who's the Managing Director of Good Food Institute India, to share his views for 5 minutes about the sessions today. And then we can open it up for Q&A. I've put in a quick note around what kind of questions you should ask. Just add some context to your background. Be specific when you ask questions. If there's anything which requires a longer discussion, please take them on email with the speakers after the session. Thank you so much. Varun, would you like to start?
Yeah, no, thank you so much, Shardul. I actually don't have 5 minutes worth of things to share. I just wanted to say thank you to both presenters, Ashish as well as Rinka, for those excellent presentations. I'm eager to move on to Q&A from the group. I just wanted to say really quickly to Rinka's point about localization and cost competitiveness and making sure that all solutions that are being developed in India are fit for purpose in India. Yeah, Rinka, that's exactly why we exist in India, because we understand that the value proposition of India and the needs for India are very different from the rest of the world, right? So we're working with multiple flavor houses, multiple manufacturing partners, multiple universities, the government. We would be very glad to collaborate on challenges. We have something upcoming that maybe we can discuss with you and announce to the community fairly soon. And I also wanted to say that with respect to the Q&A that's coming in, so since some of the questions are rather basic in terms of how do we make protein affordable for everyone, that's a very large topic and quite basic. I would actually encourage people to consider taking GFI's massive open online course, which we can send out in an email after this. It's a course about the 101 basics of plant-based and cultivated meat. It's normally taken over 6 weeks. It's something that is genuinely extremely educational and really useful as a starting point to get into this sector, as well as learn more broadly about food development, biotech, and the intersection of these technologies and how they're changing the world as we speak. So we'll send that out after this. And I'll throw it back to you, Shardul, to take the questions further.
There is one question which I would like to break the ice with. There's a question from Mehul Mittal. How difficult it is to get patent on plant-based meat, milk, egg product in India? Is there anyone who has Indian patent already based on the food space? So for this particularly is a very good question. And I've been a patent attorney in my past career. So for me, patent is something which stands in the court of law, which stands the litigation. So the trend in India is generally like, if you have something, you file it, you put patent pending, or you don't put it, but even people won't understand the difference between patent and patent application. So I have seen a couple of applications, but I have not seen any strong patent granted patent in India, specifically by an Indian entity in this particular space. But these things could be very well patented depending upon how you differentiate it from the current art, and how you are going to demonstrate that particular difference, and how is it going to benefit the public at large. So it's quite possible to have the patent on this particular thing. It's 17 hours. But I have not seen any strong patent in the field so far.
Okay, thank you for answering that question. There was also a question on your specific PPT, I think, when you were asking about the R&D challenges that you were talking about. So some people had a question around scaling up, right? You mentioned that scale up as an important part of what technical consultants can do for entrepreneurs. So what does it really take to take a recipe from lab scale to actually making sure that it does not fail when you're taking it to manufacturing with co-packers, etc., etc.? If you can just shed some light on that, that'll be helpful.
Yeah. So when you're scaling up a product from lab to the industrial scale, the process has to be gradual. It has to be stepwise, and you have to identify certain critical parameters. Aboli would add to this more. But it is like what are the process critical parameters, how the raw material is going to behave in a particular set of conditions, in particular equipments and all. That is what you have to identify. And it is again a kind of like you have to go stepwise and do certain iterations in a phase-wise manner. Abul, you want to add something?
Yeah, see, in case of the scale up and the lab scale trials, there is a difference between the processes. Sometimes what happen in the scale ups are the different machines are there, and lab scales are the different. When you do in the lab scale, there is a different proportion of ingredient processes, and when you commercialize, there is a gap between the two things. If, for example, we have done this, if you in the mayonnaise, there is a number of in India there is a mayonnaise prepared in a different way of mayonnaise, but in the standard way you have to require the Stephen cooker, different processes. It should be arranged, time, temperature, vacuum. It should be specific to the aqueous phase, liquid. There is an three type of phases. There is a water phase, there is fat based phase, and dry phase. There is a 3 ingredient. So how you have to mixing, what are the stages of mixing? It should be immersion, should be not the break in the specific temperature and time. That same thing you have to do the homogenization, how you do the different things. So in case of the scale up, you have to recommend the which type of ingredient you are using, which type of process you are using, and how you are the hurdle technology, what is the pH, temperature, process, bottom line, how is the environment of your area. And then packaging also is very important, which packaging, which temperature you're filling the products. All parameters are important in the scale ups.
Yeah, if I just may add on to what Aboli and Ashish was saying, I think the other thing is also to very early on in the process, very early on in your development process, have a good understanding of, okay, based on my lab scale, what is my manufacturing process going to look like, so that when you're talking to vendors and you're talking to manufacturers, you have that very clear in your mind. In fact, we've done a couple of projects where typically a manufacturer identification will come a little later in the journey of the development process. You would do your lab scale development and then get started. But the challenge for us on this project, for example, was the technology was new. It was something that we didn't know whether there's even a manufacturer available. So I think in our the way we engage, and that's how we work, and that's the best way to work with a development partner, is to say that, hey, can we first go and identify that using this kind of a product, technology, etc., is there even a manufacturer available within your country? Is there somebody available? What is the kind of processes, etc., so that when you go backwards in terms of laboratory scale process, you've actually developed something which is scalable. So I think it's being open to both the thoughts, and also very early on in your design brief, when you have a product design in your mind, you're very clear that, okay, this is what I would like to deliver. This is the kind of, broadly, the kind of cost at which I would like to deliver it. Putting all those things in mind, because sometimes you go and create a beautiful Taj Mahal, but if you can't sell it at the price that you want to sell it, it can be a challenge. So it's a little iterative, like Ashish said, and I think it's important to bring some of these things, as very early on into the process of development. Yeah.
Hey, really quickly, sorry, Shardul, really quickly, I wanted to add one more thing in addition to the points about scaling up and manufacturing, which were excellently answered by both Rinka and as well as Aboli and Ashish. I just wanted to add that not only is it important to think about manufacturing and scale up, it's also important to think about how product development is guided by that entire chain that Rinka was just mentioning, right? So for example, this is an example I use quite a lot. Plant-based cheeses have a lower melting point than cow's cheese. And so, for example, if you wanted to sell a plant-based cheese to Domino's, it would be very difficult to do so, because then what that would entail is they would have to go to every single one of their outlets and ask them to cook this one SKU, this vegan cheese, pizzas being made with this vegan cheese, at a lower temperature, which is going to be impossible. So all of these things are really complex and really affect product development, how it performs at manufacturing, how it performs when it's being served. All of these things really affect the ingredients and the way that you're developing them early on. So it's important to work with your co-developer or with your team in-house to make sure that you're accounting for all of these things all through this entire chain of product development to scale up in manufacturing to distribution and the end consumer.
Yeah, just to sum up what every one of us is trying to say, the approach to product development, scaling up should be very holistic. It should take into consideration the technical challenges or logistic challenges as Varun mentioned, or the price point expectation as Rinka mentioned, and the techno commercial feasibility, everything. So you have to take into account everything. You cannot just focus on one thing. So that's how it has to be.
Varun, I want to add one thing in the this vegan cheese. We have already developed one of the customer in the 8-year backs, because I have the experience in these vegan products in the last 12 years, because we are working with that time specifically in the texturization and how it is the melting point and which temperature we have to do it. We are already commercialized and they are selling in the Europe and US, Iraq also.
Sounds good. And I think, so a lot of entrepreneurs that I've interacted with in the past kind of don't do that holistic approach like Ashish and Rinka mentioned. So they kind of fall into traps like without consumer testing, without doing focus grouping, without, kind of validating their idea. They go on to purchase fixed machinery and invest a lot in distribution, etc. I mean, it sounds counterintuitive, but you'll be surprised how often that happens. So I think a lot of good points here. For next question, I think there were a couple of questions around extrusion, specifically around wet extrusion, dry extrusion. We know that plant-based meats specifically require a lot of texturization, and that process is usually done through through extrusion. India obviously has a dearth of extruders per se when it comes to commercial scale or pilot scale extruders. That is a big challenge when it comes to development of plant-based meat alternatives, which are replicating the sensory aspects of actual animal source meat alternatives. So on that note, Ashish, Aboli, or Rinka, any other specific ideas on how people can go for better texturization or figure out that limitation? Are there co-packers with those capacities in India, etc.? If any perspectives you can share on that?
Yeah, so here there are two perspectives. First is from the point of view of, or rather three perspectives. One is kind of like the process, second is the ingredient, third is the machinery. So as you rightly mentioned, there's a dearth of extruders, especially at lab and pilot scale. So what we would be installing in our new facility, there would be an extruder there, which would be a kind of lab come pilot scale kind of extruder for specifically for this meat products, these plant-based meat products. Secondly, coming to the process and ingredients, I would leave it to Aboli, because in her past assignment with Dow, Aboli has been a texture expert, and she has already worked in this space as she already mentioned, say around 9 years back, developing texture for this vegetarian vegan meats in the past. So Abuli, up to you.
Yeah, in this case, we can use that there is both the as you say that we are approaching as a hurdle technology. Here also we can use some of the texturizing material and some ingredient, and there is a process. at which temperature, which hydration time, which processes, which ingredient you have to use, and combination you can get the proper processed products. So you have to look at the what is in whatever the hydrocolloids you are using, what temperature you are using, what is an hydration time, and what type of your raw material you are using, which type of protein you are using. Depend upon the protein, it is a change in the behavior properties of the each hydrocolloids also. And there is an even hydration time. If it is not proper, then your product will be not in the shelf stable. Whenever you do in the shelf stability also, there is a very important, sometimes what happen in our experience, we have done the product, there is a 10-day shelf life, we get the good product, but in 11th day we found there is something is different product is coming out. So we have tried out the different combination, different processes, different hurdle technology. So we have to do the combination, we read the different, we are already working with some of the CFTRI people also, and some CFT and other people, where the some how we can improve our technology and their knowledges. So here is a major is the texturization is very important with the helping of the hydrocolloids and your right grade of proteins, and even extrusion technology and different type of blendings, what type of even you can use some enzymes modification, how you are to do it in the protein. That is very important for the which pH, which temperature you have to do it. Everything you have to mention, each and everything are very important stage wise process.
Makes sense. Yeah.
And also,
Rinka, would you like to add?
Yeah. No, just to add to that, I think like Aboli and Ashish said, that I think one is the functional ingredients parts, whether it's starches, gums, or it's fibers, for example. And the fibers, there's again a lot of work that's happened in the space of pea fiber or corn and citrus fibers and so on. So there's a lot of work that's happening in that space as well, which is from a texture perspective. But I mean, if I look at an extrusion capacity perspective, I think Shardul, I don't know if you asked this question. Dry extrusion, there's enough capacity in the country, right? I mean, whether it's about snacking, extruded snacks, etc., there's just sufficient capacity. And the issue is more in terms of wet extrusion and looking at products which are through like Beyond Meat, etc. And that is where we need to get into it. We need to be able to identify. So like I said, when we did a technology which was completely different, we were able to find somebody working in a very small scale. In fact, just a couple of days ago, somebody called me saying, I'd like to set up a factory doing this. Now I said, now that's interesting. So there are people who are wanting to get into this space either as manufacturer or as marketeers, and let's try to figure out if there is, like for example, wet extrusion, is there capacity available. I would also urge people to talk to places like the food parks. And that's another thing that we found interesting in Bangalore, not so much for extrusion, but even other processes, where we've tied up with the India Food Park in Tumkur, and they do have a fair amount of capabilities available in terms of manufacturing capabilities. And I think those are things that we utilize for doing trials, for even scaling up our operations for some of our the other thing is also some of the institutes like CFTRI and NIFTM, etc., they're also doing incubation centers. So I would really urge people to talk to them, see, because like for example, when we were doing something on plant protein based snacking recently, and we found some very good trials we were able to do at a particular institute. And I think that's something we ourselves felt, oh, I don't know if this is even possible, but then we were able to achieve it, and the institutes were quite happy to work with us. So I think it's a question of being able to also utilize the networks and ecosystem, getting the right partners to be able to work with, right? So I think I would urge people to try and reach out to institutes and reach out to their incubation centers as well. Yeah, and the food parks and so on. Yeah. But if there are any specific questions on this, Varun and Shardul, just pass it on to us, and we can have, we can sort of look at it.
Good. Yeah, I'll also encourage people to get in touch with both Rinka and Ashish after the webinar for specific questions. One more theme that was emerging from the questions we received was India-based plants, right? We have a lot of biodiversity, and people have been talking about how we can use indigenous sources of plant proteins, which are beneficial. So there are questions around functionality, how those ingredients would perform, is there enough research, and then obviously there's a techno-commercial angle to choosing those ingredients. So we talked a little bit about extrusion as a machine choice and a technology choice. Can we talk a little bit about ingredients and what would you guys suggest? So there were questions around how can we replace whey or egg-based proteins in products, which if you want to replicate plant-based egg or dairy, for example, or if you're trying to go for plant-based meat. Again, all of these products would have different plant-based sources that would be useful for them. But like we know in India, not a lot of people are currently manufacturing that or isolates, concentrates. So given all of this context, Ashish and Rinka and Aboli, would you like shed some light on what specifically people should look at when they're choosing ingredients in the Indian context? And the end goal is obviously to achieve sensory replication of plant-based meat, eggs, and dairy, right? Not subpar products which not taste like plant-based, I mean, their actual animal counterparts. So given that context, if you'd like to go first, Rinka?
Yeah, sure. So, I mean, I think this is, again, like I said, it's early days. Everybody's looking at different options out there. But I would say, whether it's sources of lentils, for example, in India, and we're looking at a lot of them. Some of them are fairly, some kind of lentils which grow more inwards, and whether they have certain amino acid profiles, which is different from the regular tur dal, moong dal, and all of that. And of course, when people talk of moong protein isolate, we are one of the largest manufacturers of moong dal. So we should be able to figure out how we can utilize a lot more of that. And like Aboli was saying, I mean, whether it's through some further enzyme processing, etc., do we need to do a bit of that to be able to get better digestible proteins? So we could look at that. We have seen, we've personally used a lot around rice as one of the protein sources that we've used for whether it's a milk protein replacement, just getting a high level of protein. And this is both in India and Thailand, actually, where we've seen a lot of work happening in the space of rice, using rice as a protein source. And of course there's pea protein, etc., but that's all coming from outside, whether it's yellow pea or, just generally pea proteins and stuff. Soy, we do a lot of soy. The biggest challenge with soy is, of course, the whole thing around getting the taste masking right. In terms of getting your textures and so on, one could look at, again, working with some of these really good companies like DuPont and Ingredion, etc., who've done a lot of work in this space and seeing how can we apply it for the Indian context. If I look at certain kind of millets, we found quite useful, just certain millets and certain other grains. So for example, and this is not in the context of texture, meat kind of a texture, but in the context of getting better amino acid profile. So we were finding things like amaranth, for example, actually had very good amino acid profile, stuff like that. So it's really about being able to play with these different grains to be able to get the desired profile, whether it's amino acid, PDCAS, whichever way you want to measure that, and to be able to use the right functional ingredients like starches, gums, systems like that to be able to get the correct textures and so on. So I think it's a lot of trial and effort that was required in terms of doing a lot of trial in the space is required. I mean, there's a lot of work that needs to be done, because at the end of the day, I'd also like to see how we can keep, we can make it, but if it's going to be at an extremely unaffordable price, it's going to be very difficult. So I think that's where the challenge really is, Varun and Shardul. Yeah. But add on, please, Aboli and Ashish, please add on,
Yeah, Rinka, thanks. I very much agree with what you said. And the major challenge, see, Indian people, specifically, if you have to say it, any industry or anything, extraction plant or something, people are very much business minded. So as of now, the market size is not encouraging enough for companies to invest a lot in such kind of projects. But the good news is we know a few companies who are working and very much in the game and very much doing the protein extractions from the indigenous sources of protein, like may it be cereals or peas or rice, this kind of. And they also have intentions to scale up and be a kind of prime suppliers, indigenous supplier of this protein, so that we do not have to import this and it becomes more affordable here. So there are companies like this who are working, but they are at the very nascent stage, all of this. And I'm sure, like as we go, as this particular industry grows, we'll have a good number of players where we have so that we do not have to go to the foreign companies for buying the proteins. Another aspect is we have to use certain other kind of proteins. For example, spirulina is a fantastic source of protein. So similar kind of proteins we have to evaluate, and of course that onus lies on people like us, Rinka, to try it more in the products and have the industry take it to the market. So that's another way to look at it. But sooner or later, I guess, maybe if my intuition, or based on whatever I know, the companies with whom I'm interacting, I guess in a couple of years or so, we'll have at least 2 or 3 companies within India who would be supplying the proteins to the industry. And they are very much research based. What they're investing into the R&D, they're investing into the right processes, so that they develop the right processes to get the protein which has all the required parameters to be techno-commercially suitable for use as an ingredient in different products.
Even cost optimization also they are doing for the cost feasibility. As Rinka said, the costing is very important. Each and any product, the feasibility is important. If you do in the simple milk, the milk replacement, your cost should be the similar like milk. It is not higher, so your feasibility of the product will be the increases. So if suppose example almond milk prices is going up to 320 300 rupees to 50 rupees bucks, but the specific category people only will buy that type of milk. Soya milk is allergen, so everything is different. Which type of ingredient you have to take it, that is very important for the health basis.
Yeah. Price, taste, convenience, like GFI always says, is 3 major factors you should always consider before even thinking about entering this sector. And I think we covered a lot of ground on local crops. There were questions around amino acid profiles of some of these crops. I think there's a lot of work going on, and Varun can add a little bit about the research ongoing in this space.
I should just add a little bit about what GFI India is doing in this regard. So we have a very broad initiative called the Indigenous Crops Initiative, which takes into account many of the factors that Ashish Aboli and Rinka just put forward, which is the goal with bringing indigenous crops online is not just to consider the domestic market, it is to consider the requirements for the international plant-based foods market, which has been exploding and will continue to do so over the next 5-10 years, right? So even though we're talking about supplying to domestic companies, I think if people want to get involved on the ingredient side, there's a huge opportunity to sell through to different markets. So Just, for example, which makes eggs from mung beans and is inspiring many companies around the world to do the same, is going to be one of the largest private buyers of mung beans anywhere in the world within the next couple of years, if they meet anywhere close to their projections. So Beyond Meat, as another example, Beyond Meat is responsible for the growth of an entire value chain of yellow peas in North America. At the end of 2018 in the United States, yellow peas for pea protein were grown on something like 865,000 acres of land in 7 states. At the end of 2019, that had grown to 1.1 million acres of land. It's a jump of 28% in 1 year, primarily because one company needed to buy much more pea protein to scale up. So that's really the promise of the sector, and that's just one company. Imagine the benefit we can drive to Indian farmers, to Indian processors, to Indian businesses over time if we're able to scale up this work. And as Shardul said and the other speakers said, that's a techno-economic challenge. We're doing some work funded by the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation for millet and protein blends, millet and soy protein, millet and pea protein blends, to see how we can bring those online as ingredients. So as that information becomes available over the next year or so, we'd be happy to, as with everything we do, make it openly available to all the entrepreneurs here.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Varun, for that context. The couple of questions were around, so we rightly talked about rice, right? Because India grows a lot of wheat and rice. There were a couple of questions around wheat as a source of protein. If you guys would like to quickly add on that, maybe Rinka.
See, wheat is...
Go ahead.
See, wheat is a major thing is, if you want to sell in, the wheat contains the very less, 14% only the protein content. And there is a major content is gluten. Gluten digestibility is very means allergen is the highest allergen content of gluten. So is the protein content also low, and there is an allergen content is also there. So when you say the wheat, we have to thought about any different processes or something new technology, we have to try it out.
Yeah, I mean, just to add to that, like, yes, agreed, wheat is a low source of protein, but then I think in combination with other protein sources, we've managed to do something and more in the space of kids nutrition space. Fairly, good solutions the moment you blend it with other things. And I'm not saying necessarily isolates, but even if you're looking at higher sources of protein combinations, wheat becomes a good, actually wheat from a sensory perspective is good. Yeah, and it gives you a good taste profile and all of that. The challenges sometimes with wheat, etc., becomes that high levels usually tend to cause an issue, which is more from a sensory perspective, where if you try to do a beverage, for example, you'll get a very viscous product, or if it's an extruded snack, for example, it could be, again, the taste of the product can be an issue. So those are things to be managed, but I think in combination with various other protein sources, it actually works out to be a fairly cheap and effective way to get protein in.
Makes sense. Thank you so much.
Instead of wheat, I suggest to use if you take the spirulina is having 65% of the protein content and all type of maximum essential amino acids and potassium, zinc. These are the essential metals also you can get it. And you require this type of combination with the wheat. Or you can take as a lentil, as in Bengal, there is a black gram. Also, the one of the source is very good source of the protein, which is having, in case of the lentils, highest content of 28% of the protein content in the even apart from the mung bean, black gram is having 28% and mung bean is having 24%. So difference is there.
Absolutely. So like that day we covered an example on the previous call about horse gram protein. One of the members of our community is also working on that. Very high amounts of protein, right, in the concentrates, and it's also very cheap at the same time. So just figuring out that combination of crops which are indigenous, which are available in a large quantity, but are still not being looked at as a potential source of excellent functional protein, it's something a big white space. And B2B opportunities, like I've answered some question personally on that to some of the attendees, is a huge white space as well. Like if you can start plants which are making concentrates and isolates, like Varun already talked about, you can basically gear up India to become a global supply hub, at the same time meet the local needs. There were a couple of questions around. So a lot of these, when we are thinking about new product development, obviously protein is a focus, but there's also a lot of focus on shelf stability when it comes to India, right? India, in the specific Indian context, and increase shelf life without it having to be frozen or refrigerated, because the supply chain is kind of tricky to maneuver through. So given that context, what ingredients or plants protein sources are also good antioxidant and active or antibacterial, have those components, so that the hurdle technology that you talked about, shelf stability that you talked about, could be more synergistic when you're thinking of ingredients in the new product development process. Rinka, would you like to start with that, or would you like to?
Yeah, sure. Yeah, sure. So I think from a shelf stability perspective, more than the protein source, because protein, per se will be unstable whichever way you take it. I think it is the additives that are important. So, whether it's, in terms of antioxidants, and there's a lot of work obviously that's happened in the space of using herb extracts like rosemary, green tea, tocopherols, etc., which have been used a lot in the space of getting antioxidants out there. Texturizing agents to make sure the texture integrity is there, because one of our problems, like you mentioned absolutely correctly, is our supply chain is fluctuations in temperatures are so high. So even if I have a frozen meat product, my temperature fluctuations are so high that you tend to get and many times you would notice this when you buy a product in a retail store, it's all like stuck together, and it's just, because it's gone through a huge temperature abuse. And I think that's where the work around texturizing agents, fats, etc. need to come to be able to have the matrix be able to hold itself well together. So there, some things like protein isolates have been used, texturizing agents like, again, gums, fibers, starches, etc., which have been used to maintain that integrity. The other one that, and that's like, again, very early days, this is something that I keep throwing back as a challenge to my ecosystem partners to say, do you have natural antimicrobial solutions? And that's where some of our partners do come back with certain specific...
17:30.
Sorry?
Sorry, I think system notification. Go on, yeah.
Yeah, certain, natural antimicrobials is a space where people are working on. It's not really that we have foolproof solutions, but yeah, I mean, people are trying to work on, let's say, deodorized turmeric, and saying, I mean, that's going to be one thing. Like, those are natural antibacterial, antimicrobials, but can they be without any flavor and taste impact? So I think that's where work is happening at the moment, and we're trying to see. So we've had people who've submitted things to us with very Indian extracts, which do have some of these potential, functional benefits. But from a shelf life integrity perspective, I would say antioxidants, texturizing agents, very critical. Getting your moisture levels to be at the right thing. For example, when people talk to me about protein bars and things like that, and I find nobody's really looking at the water activity of the product. I mean, water activity of the product is high, and therefore it is not going to survive our system. It needs to be at a certain low water activity. And that's where a lot of our startup world and etc. needs to get educated in terms of what are the critical control parameters for trying to achieve certain shelf life, whether it's in the recipe or in the process. So that's really...
Yeah, thank you so much, Rinka. I think that adds a lot of perspective. In interest of time, I'll just to sum it up. Essentially, what I think is important here is any entrepreneur, any business thinking about developing products in this sector, you really need to understand that there are a lot of technical ingredients, processes, and designs, experimental designs that go into developing such a product. And I think having somebody with that expertise, whether it's a food scientist you've hired, or it's a technical consultancy, or you're talking to a food technology college or university, I think all of those things are super important. So obviously having a technical co-founder or hiring somebody to do that is super critical, like some of you might have already realized by this webinar. And there were a few questions. Sorry to break you, Ashish. I'll have to just quickly cover a few questions real quick, since we are only having 10 minutes on the webinar. And I'll suggest everybody to write to Rinka and Ashish individually and take those discussions forward. But there were some questions around how do we engage with such consultancies, and how do we bridge gaps between industry, academia, and like what things like our community is doing. So just like I covered in the start of the presentation, we have GF Ideas India community, right? The whole goal is having people like Ashish and Rinka in the community. There are about 200 people now in the community, and everybody brings a specific expertise or a skill set to this sector. Not everybody has an answer. So thank you for asking that question, right? It's very important to generate that critical initial interest in this sector, which is rapidly emerging everywhere else across the globe. I think universities, mega food parks that are coming up, individual value chain stakeholders, like some of them are present today on the call, all of them play a super important role in doing that. I think we should definitely use this directory that we covered last time as well. Sign up for the GF Ideas community, go through each other's profile, reach out to each other, and kind of always have that attitude to help others and then seek help in return, so that we can build a more active community. And I mean, there are answers here, right? I can see in front of me, there are people who want to start B2B concentrate manufacturing plants, and there are people who are asking for those B2B concentrates, to be honest, to be sourced locally, because affording imported proteins is really tricky. So it's just a matter of information gap, and how do we bridge that. So I look forward to having you all in that initiative with us. I think there are a few questions which we can take in the next 5 minutes before we close down the webinar. Yeah, and there are questions around how we can basically interact with these consultancies, right? So obviously a lot of the members on the members directory are obviously for-profit organizations. They are not necessarily non-profit. GFI is non-profit, and we create everything open access for the benefit of the growth of ecosystem in India. But people are very free to kind of validate their own relationships with other members on a one-to-one basis and kind of take it forward from there. And I'm sure that being part of being in the same community, knowing each other and kind of working towards the same mission and cause would help you guys figure out better areas of collaboration. There were a few questions around regulatory framework. So I don't know if Rinka might be able to take them, but essentially people are asking about what are the specific challenges in plant protein ecosystem when it comes to regulatory challenges in India. So I think one of the questions which Varun answered, and then maybe Rinka can add to it for a minute, was the fact that a lot of these ingredients are plant-based, right? So there's not a lot of novel stuff happening. A lot of these ingredients are already approved. Some of them might fall into the novel category. And we recommend definitely hiring somebody who has an understanding of FSSAI laws. It could be a consultancy, it could be IP guy, it could be somebody who's working in food labeling, design, etc. And then kind of taking that. And there are not a lot of clear answers. Like there are basic questions like how we can have the white space and the labels and preservatives. A lot of those things might fall into novel or proprietary ingredients. So having an expert in-house to kind of navigate through that is the best way of taking that forward. Rinka, do you have some perspective to add here?
Can I just add a bit here? I think, especially in the startup world, I do find this always is a bit of, misconception that, oh my God, FSSAI regulations, it will not pass through. And you're almost a little overwhelmed or scared to even go through that path. That is not true. I mean, FSSAI, in my view, in the last few years has actually gone a lot ahead in terms of opening up as much as they can. Unless and until you're really bringing an absolutely novel ingredient, like you just said, into the country, which requires a prior approval, you don't require prior approvals to go through your entire thing. So which is why it's very important. Like we have a regulatory advisor who's been head of regulatory affairs for a large company for 35 years, and she's advising us on regulations. So when she looks at things, yeah, this is how we fit this in. They define categories. Which category does your product fall into? What is important is therefore then to understand what additives can you add, which you can't add, what claims can you make on something like this, what you can't make. Those are well defined. And I think that is what we need to really get into. I would really urge people to hire the right people to be able to advise you on this. It's a bit of a misnomer that this is a very difficult space and it's just not going to get approvals. I mean, we've got approvals for plant-based nutritional products, and and they are like under, let's say, a category 13, which is a functional nutraceutical product or functional foods for dietary uses. The FSSAI has very clear regulations on those. In fact, they've gone to the extent, and I was talking about this to somebody else in the morning, but I said, if you apply for a certain license and they don't revert back to you, I think in about 50 days or something, you are allowed to go forward. You're allowed to go and launch. So I think let's look at it in a very progressive way that they've actually moved forward. And we need to see, therefore, where do we fit into that entire regulatory framework? We as a company are doing a lot of masterclasses, and I'd really, I think we will have another online masterclass soon. So I would really like you guys to, log into it, attend the regulatory masterclass, which will be taken up by one of our experts. And hopefully you should be able to learn something there.
That sounds amazing, Rinka. I think we'll definitely recommend people to join and learn from that regulatory masterclass. Ashish, any other perspective to add here from your background in IP and dealing with food laws per se?
No, as I fully agree with Rinka, there are not much regulatory hurdles here. It's just because the questions are because generally, like when you are starting up, you have a number of questions. How it would go, whether FSSAI will approve or not. Only that apprehension is here. But the person who has been there, like as Rinka mentioned, or people like us who know that there's nothing new that we're going to add. There's nothing, no GMO. There's no any out of the world ingredient. There is all plant based. Is all natural. So there are no regulatory challenges on that front. It's only a matter of how you categorize that particular product. So in which well-defined categories this product is going to fix. And if it is not going to fix, probably whether it will be a novel food or whether it would be a proprietary product, that's the only question. So I don't see any regulatory challenges here.
Thank you so much. I think we have just a couple of minutes, and the last thing which we can talk about is a common theme through some of the questions in the past and also through the attendees' questions today, which is around how do we navigate this ecosystem of working with co-packers, co-manufacturers, there's always this inhibition of would somebody steal my recipes? I want to protect my ingredients. That's why it's not very open in that sense as it is in the West, in terms of professional ethics, etc., etc. So would you like to maybe as parting thoughts add some comments on that, both of you?
Yeah, so I think as part of all our project contracts, we essentially have all of this as part of our contracts. Yeah, so typically, I'm sure Ashish as well would be, and I think that's where the expertise and the professional, experience that all of us have had helps, because you need to bring in that level of professionalism in the way you work. So I think having non-confidentiality as part of your contracts, if it's an IP and the IP belongs to the client, stuff like that. So those are important things that need to be covered in a contractual kind of an engagement. So I think those are things that, we probably not, maybe, I don't know how it is in the West, but I would say we're kind of getting there. Yeah. And I would actually say, I mean, from a food and FMCG perspective, we're probably among the few setups which are there to support the entire industry. In the pharma, it's a much bigger thing. You do have CROs, you do have large CMOs and stuff like that, where you have professional kind of relationships. But I think it's just the beginning here, but I think at least we're getting.
Just to add a couple of points to what Rinka said, it's about having really watertight service agreements when you're working with a CMO or a co-packer. In that particular, you have certain provisions that you have to make sure. One obviously is non-confidentiality. Another is that you should not re-engineer whatever is given to you, whatever recipe is given to you. Third would be like you need to have a provision for some strict penalties, like if just to deter, because in Indian market, if I have to talk about, say, the most of the players, of course the big co-packers for whom co-packing is the core business, these people will never ever play with your recipes, and they are the most reliable people to go to. For example, Dynamics is not related to plant-based, but I'm giving that. Co-packing is their core business. So they are co-packers. They are not co-packing because they have free capacity. So when you're going to a guy who is manufacturing the same product as yours, and who are more or less same product and doing it for you only because he has free capacity, in such situations you have to be very, very careful. Your contracts have to be very watertight. You have to include n number of provisions into that. And up and above that, see, when you are a startup, even if, and I've been in the legal and IP field, so I know litigation is something that every startup should avoid as much as possible. And listen, until it is a do or die situation, you should not go that way. It's a very unproductive use of your funds. So how we can do that? So in you'll go to the court, there would be a dispute that will be proven in a due course. All that is said and done, but how we can prevent it? So there are certain ways you can prevent it. Is like, for example, when you are you need to have a clause in your contract where you kind of like keep certain things, undertake that you will be providing. For example, spice mix. If I'm providing a spice mix to a co-packer, and I do not disclose him that what's in there, how much quantity of what, and I get it done from somebody else and provide it to the as one of the ingredient for my my product. So that way I keep that key ingredient secret with me. There are ways to do a few things like this, which are kind of much more recommended. Means, of course, you should have watertight contracts before initiation of any transaction, but these things would come to your help more as compared to the contracts. So that is one way to do it. Second is like you should always have this, as Rinka already mentioned, the strong CDS or NDS in place. Third is wherever possible, no matter whether you will get granted a patent or not, wherever possible, you should go for a patent filing, because that again deters the co-packer, that this technology is something patented, I should not get involved. I should not get indulged in any malpractices, something like this. So there are multiple ways to do it, as mentioned. I guess that's from my side.
Thank you so much, Ashish, Aboli, and Rinka for joining us today. I think